7 years. 7 years she was on the run, rebuilding her life from the ashes, believing that man had forgotten her forever. Then one ordinary morning at a diner by the Boston Harbor, the roar of engines, 20-odd armored SUVs blocking the small street, and men in black suits deploying like a special forces team. The whole neighborhood held its breath. The tired waitress froze, her apron stained with grease, as the most powerful man in the criminal underworld stepped out, looked her straight in the eye, and whispered her name. If you want to know what those 7 years of secrecy were, like comment the name of the city you're viewing and don't turn off the screen. She didn't hear the convoy until the coffee was already burning. Vivian Hart had learned to tune out most sounds in the 7 years she'd worked the morning shift at Harlow's Diner. The rattle of the elevated train 2 blocks over, the seagulls screaming at the fish market down on Pier 9, the particular way the front door wheezed and dragged against the warped floorboards whenever somebody pushed it open too fast. She'd learned to tune out the drunks who wandered in before noon, and the truckers who lingered 3 hours over 1 cup of coffee, and the weekend tourists who photographed their eggs like they'd witnessed something sacred. She'd learned to tune out almost everything. But she couldn't tune out 31 armored SUVs. She heard it first as a low vibration in the floor, something that moved up through the worn soles of her sneakers and settled in her knees. She thought for a moment it was the water main again. The city had been doing work on the pipes all month, and twice the whole block had gone dark and cold without warning. Then the vibration sharpened into engine noise, and the engine noise multiplied, and by the time she turned from the coffee station with the scorched pot in her hand, the front windows of the diner had gone dark with the shape of vehicles. Big ones, matte black, moving in tight formation, no gaps, coordinated the way civilian traffic never was. "The hell?" said Ray, who was scraping the flat-top grill and had his back to the window. He half-turned, spatula still in hand, and then stopped talking because there wasn't much to say. The SUVs parked in a line that blocked the entire street in both directions. Every vehicle killed its engine within 3 seconds of the first one stopping. The coordination was so precise it felt choreographed, and it probably was. Vivian counted the doors as they opened, not all at once but in sequence, near side first, then far side, like a military drill, and men stepped out in dark suits that didn't wrinkle despite the August heat. She counted 12 from the vehicles at the front, more from the ones behind, some moving to flank the building while others simply stood with their hands loose at their sides and their eyes scanning everything. Nobody ran. Nobody shouted. Nobody reached for anything visible. That was what made it worse, Vivian would think later. The quiet. The diner had maybe 11 customers at that hour. 2 longshoremen sharing a booth near the back, a retired school teacher who came in every Tuesday for the blueberry pancakes she'd been ordering since 1987, a young couple who'd been bickering softly about something since they sat down and had stopped now, the woman's coffee cup halfway to her mouth and frozen there. They all watched the windows. Nobody moved toward the door. Vivian set the coffee pot down on the nearest flat surface because her hand had started to shake and she didn't want to drop it. She told herself it was nothing, a film shoot maybe, some kind of executive security detail rolling into the wrong block. She told herself this because she had spent 7 years telling herself things that weren't true, and she was very good at it by now. Then one of the men outside, the one who'd positioned himself directly in front of the diner's entrance, a man built like a refrigerator with a jaw like poured concrete, brought a finger to his ear and listened to something, and nodded once and stepped aside. And the back door of the center vehicle opened. She knew before she saw his face. She knew from the way the men around him adjusted, not moving closer, but moving differently, a subtle shift in posture and attention that people who've spent their whole lives around protective details develop without thinking about it. She knew from the way he took his time. She knew from the particular quality of silence that followed him out of the vehicle and across the sidewalk. She knew. She'd spent 7 years trying to unknow him, and she hadn't managed it. Not even close. Damien DeLuca was 41 years old, and he looked like someone had taken everything soft out of him and replaced it with something harder and colder and infinitely more dangerous. He was still the same height she remembered, still moved the same way. Unhurried, deliberate, like a man who'd never been in a hurry in his life because the world had always waited for him. His hair was darker than she remembered, or maybe that was just the light. His suit was charcoal gray and cut precisely and probably cost more than Vivian made in 6 months of double shifts. He was not handsome the way men in magazines were handsome. He was handsome the way a weapon is well made. He pushed the diner door open. It wheezed and dragged, and he didn't seem to notice, and he walked straight to the counter without looking at anyone else in the room. Vivian didn't move. She wasn't sure she could. He stopped 2 feet away from her, close enough that she could see the small scar beneath his left eye that she'd touched with her thumb once, 100 years ago, in a different life. He looked at her the same way he'd always looked at her, like she was the only thing in the room worth looking at, which had felt like a gift once and now felt like a threat. "Vivian," he said. Just that. Just her name. Quiet enough that only she could hear it, like he was confirming something to himself. The coffee pot sat on the counter between them, still warm, the last of the burnt coffee cooling inside it. Her hand had stopped shaking. She didn't know when. She became aware that her jaw was tight, that she was holding her breath, and she made herself breathe before she spoke. "You need to leave," she said. His expression didn't change. "No. This is my job. This is where I work. You can't. I know where you work." He said it without apology, without accusation, just fact. "I know where you live. I know Lily walks to school on Clement Street every morning, and her teacher's name is Ms. Farrow, and she got a gold star on her reading test last Thursday." Vivian's blood went cold. Not because he knew. She'd always understood somewhere beneath the hope that a man like Damien DeLuca could find anyone he wanted to find. She'd known that, but she'd let herself believe that wanting to find her was something he'd given up. It was the details that broke her open. Lily's teacher, the gold star. Last Thursday, she'd put that paper on the refrigerator with a ladybug magnet, and Lily had done a little dance in the kitchen, and Vivian had laughed for real. Not the performed laugh she used at work, but actually laughed. And somewhere in the distance, someone had known. "Get out," Vivian said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Whatever you think you're doing, whatever you came here to say—" "There's a man," Damien said, and the quiet way he said it stopped her cold, "who has had eyes on your apartment building for 4 months. His name is Remy Villeneuve. He works for someone I thought was dead. He is not watching you by accident, and last night, his team changed their pattern." The school teacher in the corner had stopped pretending to read her newspaper. Ray had set down his spatula. The young couple had gone completely still. Vivian looked at Damien's face, at the absence of theater in it, the absence of performance, and felt something she'd spent 7 years burying claw its way back up through the silt. Fear. Real fear. The kind that knows something true. "What does that mean?" she said. "Change their pattern. It means they moved from observation to preparation." He held her gaze. "Vivian, I need you to listen to me." "I have been listening," she said, and her voice cracked on the last word, which she hated. "I've spent 7 years not listening to you, not thinking about you. Not." She stopped, pressed her lips together. The diner was too quiet, and she was too exposed, and this was not the conversation she'd ever wanted to have in front of Ray and 11 customers. "Why are you here? Why now? After 7 years, what could you possibly—" "Because I just found you 4 days ago," he said. She blinked. "Someone hid you." He said it plainly, like he was describing weather. "Someone buried the file. It took me 4 days from the moment I had the information to get here, and I drove through the night because the alternative was waiting, and I don't have the patience for waiting when—" He stopped. Something moved across his face that might have been the ghost of the man she'd known before. "When it matters." The door at the back of the diner swung open. Vivian turned automatically and saw 2 of Damien's men stepping inside, not rushing, not urgent, just repositioning, and Ray took a step back from the grill and said, Hey, nobody said you could come back there." "Ray," Vivian said. Ray looked at her. "It's okay," she said, which was the second lie she'd told in the last 30 seconds, the first being the idea that anything about this was going to be okay. She turned back to Damien. She wanted to hate him cleanly, had spent years cultivating that hate into something organized and manageable, a hatred she could set on a shelf and look at sometimes and feel justified. But hate had always required a certain amount of distance, and he was standing 2 feet away from her, and the scar was still there. and his voice was still the same. And underneath the architecture of the man he'd become, she could still find the shape of the one she'd known. It made the hate complicated. She'd always hated that it made the hate complicated. "You left," she said. It came out smaller than she intended. "I know. You didn't call. You didn't send someone. You didn't— There was nothing, Damien. Nothing. And then I find out I'm—" She stopped, glanced toward the back of the diner, toward the hallway that led to the small office where the morning manager kept his scheduling sheets, and where, right now, a photograph of a 6-year-old girl was tucked inside Vivian's locker. "Not here," she said. "We're not talking about this here." "No," he agreed. "We're not. And we're not going anywhere in one of those trucks." Something that might have been amusement moved at the corner of his mouth, gone before she could be sure of it. "The Suburban's clean, swept this morning." "I don't care if it was swept. I care that it's yours." "Everything within 4 blocks of here is mine right now," he said, and it wasn't a boast. It was just geography. "That's the only reason you're still safe." She wanted to argue with that. She wanted to lay out the 7 years of safety she'd managed without him, the apartment with the deadbolt she'd installed herself, the self-defense classes she'd taken at the YMCA, the way she'd chosen Clement Street for the school because it had good sightlines and 3 exit routes, things she'd thought about because she wasn't stupid, because she'd known his world even if she'd walked away from it, because some things you couldn't unlearn no matter how hard you tried. She wanted to say all of that. Instead, she untied her apron. Ray was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Worry, maybe, or the particular kind of helplessness that good people feel when they understand that what's happening is beyond them. He'd been her boss for 5 years, and he'd never asked where she came from, and she'd never told him, and that arrangement had worked for both of them. "I'll need the rest of the day," she said. "Vivian, I'll make up the hours." He nodded slowly. "You gonna be okay?" She folded the apron over the counter. "I'll call you." She didn't answer his question, which was answer enough. Outside, the August heat was immediate and specific. The particular wet heat of Boston Harbor in summer, brine and diesel and something cooking somewhere that she usually found comforting. Today, she barely registered it. 2 of Damien's men fell into position on either side of her without being asked, and she noted the way they moved and the discipline of it, and felt something unpleasant settle into her stomach. She'd forgotten what this felt like, the machinery of it, the weight. Damien walked beside her close enough that his shoulder nearly brushed hers. 4 months, she said, because the number wouldn't leave her alone. "You said he's been watching for 4 months." "At least." "And before that?" "Nothing I've found yet, but nothing I've found doesn't mean nothing." She stopped walking. He stopped with her. 2 of the security teams shifted almost imperceptibly, a micro-adjustment, staying in position. The rest of the street was empty. She realized the foot traffic had evaporated, pedestrians rerouting themselves around the blockade without anyone having to ask them, which was either very professional or very frightening, probably both. "Where's Lily right now?" Vivian said. It wasn't a question. "In school," Damien said. "Ms. Farrow's class. My people are on the building." The cold came back. "You already—" "Without asking me. I got here 4 hours ago. I needed to confirm she was safe before I came to you." "She's my daughter." Vivian's voice had edges in it now. "Mine. You don't get to make decisions about her without—" "You're right." He said it without flinching. "You're right, and I'm sorry. And we can have that conversation in full, but I need you in the vehicle first." She looked at him. He looked back. Around them, the harbor traffic moved in the distance, and a gull screamed once and then was quiet. "Tell me one thing first," she said. He waited. "When you found out where I was. When you found that file." She watched his face, watched for the tell she'd learned to read years ago, the small tightening around his eyes that happened when he was deciding what to leave out. "What did it say?" "About why I disappeared." Something shifted in his face. Not the tell. Something bigger than the tell. Something that moved through his whole expression like weather. "It said you made a deal," he said carefully, "with a man in my organization, that you traded information about my operation in exchange for money and relocation. A clean exit." The sound that came out of Vivian was not a laugh. It was something that had the shape of a laugh and none of the warmth. "I never made any deal," she said. "I didn't know anyone in your organization well enough to make a deal. I left because someone brought me a photograph." Her throat tightened. She pushed through it. "A photograph of you, with a woman, with a date and a timestamp and a location, and a note that said you'd arranged for me to disappear quietly once you were done with me." Damien had gone very still. "I left," Vivian said, "because I thought you'd already chosen to be done with me. I left because I was 8 weeks pregnant and alone, and I believed the evidence someone put in front of me, and I was 24 years old and terrified, and—" She stopped, breathed. "That photograph. Do you want to tell me who took it?" His jaw had gone rigid. His eyes had gone somewhere cold and very far away. "No," he said quietly, "because I think I already know." The first shot hit the diner's front window from across the street, and the glass didn't shatter. It collapsed inward in a wave, and the sound arrived half a second later like an afterthought, and then Damien's body was against hers and his arm was across her shoulders, driving her down, and all around them the machinery she'd spent 7 years trying to forget came alive all at once. She heard the voices of his men in clipped bursts. She heard return fire, controlled and immediate, from positions she couldn't locate. She heard a car alarm start somewhere to her left. She heard Damien's voice against her ear saying her name, just her name, over and over, and she realized with a hollow clarity that whoever was shooting wasn't shooting at him. They were shooting at her. And then one of his men was pulling her up and moving her fast toward the center vehicle, and through the noise and the motion and the specific sharp smell of cordite that she'd hoped to never smell again, one thought cut through everything else with the precision of a blade. Lily was at school. Lily was at school, and Vivian didn't know if the school was the target or the distraction, and she couldn't reach her, and the SUV door was slamming shut, and Damien was already on the phone saying something hard and fast in a voice she'd never heard him use before. And from the window of the moving vehicle, Vivian saw the figure standing at the mouth of the alley across from the diner. Not one of the shooters. The shooters were professionals, invisible, positioned high. This figure was standing in the open, standing and watching. Watching her specifically, she understood, because even from this distance she could feel the weight of his attention. He was older than she expected, thinner. There was something wrong with his left hand. She couldn't see what, but the way he held it against his body, the particular tension of it. He watched the vehicle pull away. He didn't run. He didn't reach for a weapon. He smiled. And then the vehicle turned the corner and he was gone, and Damien was beside her speaking in short, urgent sentences into his phone. And from somewhere in the disciplined silence behind his voice, she could hear the specific quality of catastrophe being managed. "The school," she said. Her voice surprised her. "See?" Steady, which felt wrong. "Damien, the school." He looked at her. Something in his face answered her before his mouth did. "We need to get to the school," she said. "I know," he said. "Vivian, now." "I know." He reached out and took her hand. Not gently, not romantically, just firmly, like she was a thing he was not willing to let go of, and she didn't pull away because she was too afraid to pull away, and because the man in the alley had smiled. The man in the alley had smiled. The school was 6 blocks from the diner, and it took them 4 minutes to get there, which was 4 minutes too long. Vivian spent those 4 minutes with her hand pressed flat against the window glass, watching the street scroll past, counting intersections by instinct, a habit she'd developed without meaning to, back when she'd first moved to this neighborhood and needed to know where everything was in relation to everything else. Back when she'd told herself she was just being practical. Back before she'd admitted, even privately, that she was mapping escape routes. Damien was on 2 phones simultaneously, which she hadn't known was physically possible until she watched him do it. He wasn't loud. He was very quiet, actually, which was worse, quiet the way still water is quiet, before something large moves through it. His left hand held one phone to his ear, while his right thumb moved over the screen of the second one. And he spoke in short bursts that were half English and half something she didn't speak, and she didn't ask him to translate because she could hear enough in the cadence to understand that the picture wasn't good. The driver didn't use the siren. Didn't need to. The vehicle at the front of their reduced convoy just moved through traffic with a particular quality of momentum that other cars felt before they understood it, and the street opened up in front of them. "Tell me what we're driving into," Vivian said. Damien held up one finger, finished the sentence he was speaking into the left phone, lowered it. "2 of my people are on the school already. Building is locked down as of—" He checked the time. 3 minutes ago. No movement on the exterior. Classroom windows are covered. Covered how? Men on the roof lines across the street. She absorbed that. "You already had a plan for this." "I had contingencies." "That's not what I asked." He looked at her steadily. "Yes, I had a plan. Which means you knew this might happen when you came to the diner. Which means I prepared for the possibility." "Damien." She said his name the way she used to say it when she wanted him to stop choosing his words carefully and just say the thing. He recognized it. She watched him recognize it, the slight shift in his face, the way his jaw reset. "Did you come to the diner knowing we might get shot at?" "I came to the diner knowing that if I'd found you, it was possible someone else had found you too." He held her eyes. "That's not the same thing." "It's close enough," she said, and turned back to the window. They pulled up to Clement Street Elementary at 9:47 in the morning, and the first thing Vivian saw was the locked front gate and the 2 men standing just inside it who were not school security guards and were not dressed like school security guards, and were looking at the convoy with the careful non-expression of professionals confirming what they expected to see. The second thing she saw was Ms. Farrow's classroom window on the second floor, where the blinds had been drawn, and where she could see the shadow of someone standing just behind the blinds, watching the street. She was out of the vehicle before the driver had fully stopped. "Vivian, stay in the car if you want." She didn't look back. She heard him get out behind her. The men at the gate moved aside. She pushed through into the front courtyard, and the school felt wrong in the specific way that institutions feel wrong when they've shifted from their intended purpose. Too quiet, no movement through the ground floor windows, no sound from any of the classrooms. She'd dropped Lily off here every weekday morning for 2 years. She knew what this building sounded like when it was alive, and it didn't sound like that now. A woman came out the front door. Not a teacher, not an administrator, one of Damien's people in a dark blazer with her hair pulled back and an earpiece, and a face that communicated competence without warmth. "Ms. Hart," she said. "Where is she?" "Second floor, room 214, she's—" Vivian was already moving past her. She took the stairs 2 at a time and turned left at the top, and 2 more of Damien's people were in the hallway, and neither of them tried to stop her. They just watched her pass with the professional attentiveness of people who knew she had authorization, and also that nothing short of a structural collapse was going to slow her down right now. She got to room 214 and pushed the door open. 22 first graders looked up at her from where they were seated on the floor in the center of the room, away from the windows. Ms. Farrow was sitting with them, cross-legged, reading from a picture book she'd been using to keep them occupied, and she looked up at Vivian with an expression that was doing very hard work to stay calm for the sake of the children. And in the back of the group, sitting next to a small boy with a missing front tooth who had fallen asleep against her shoulder, was Lily. Lily had dark eyes and her father's jaw and Vivian's stubbornness, and she was 6 years old, and she had never once in her life been in the kind of danger that Vivian had spent 7 years trying to ensure she would never be in. And she looked up at her mother from across the room with an expression that was trying very hard to be brave and was mostly succeeding, and Vivian crossed the room and knelt down and pulled her daughter into her arms and held on. Lily didn't ask what was happening. She just held on back. "We're going to go on a little trip," Vivian said into her hair. "Okay? You and me." "Okay," Lily said, in the small voice she used when she already knew something was wrong and was trying to make it easier for Vivian. Vivian stood up, keeping Lily's hand. She looked at Ms. Farrow. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry for all of this." Ms. Farrow nodded tightly. "Will you let us know when it's over?" Vivian said. "Yes." Damien was in the hallway when she came out with Lily. She hadn't expected him to be there himself. She'd expected him to stay downstairs, to let his people handle it, the way he always used to delegate the human moments, because they made him uncomfortable. But he was there, leaning against the opposite wall with his arms at his sides, and he looked at Lily with an expression that Vivian recognized as something she'd never seen from him before and couldn't immediately name. Lily looked at him. She had no reason to know him. She'd never seen him, never been told about him. Vivian had made choices about that, deliberate choices, choices she'd revisited at 3 a.m. more times than she could count. Lily knew she had a father somewhere. She knew Vivian didn't talk about him. She'd stopped asking questions about it the way children sometimes do when they sense the question causes pain and decide, in their quiet wisdom, that the pain isn't worth whatever answer they'd get. So Lily looked at Damien the way she looked at any stranger, with careful assessment, brown eyes moving from his face to the men in the hallway to her mother's face and back again. "Who are you?" she said. Damien didn't look away from her. "My name is Damien," he said. Lily considered this for a moment. "You have a lot of people," she said. "I do." "How come?" The corner of his mouth moved. "It's a long story." Lily looked at her mother again. Vivian said nothing because there was nothing to say. Not here, not now, not with the school in lockdown and the smell of cordite still caught somewhere in her memory, and the man from the alley's smile sitting behind her eyes, like something she couldn't unsee. "Okay," Lily said, with the particular pragmatism of small children, and that was that. They moved fast after that. Vivian didn't let go of Lily's hand in the stairwell, in the courtyard, getting into the vehicle, and Lily didn't try to pull free. She just walked alongside her mother with her backpack bumping against her shoulders and her sneakers squeaking on the wet pavement from where the morning fog had settled. Damien rode in the same vehicle with them. He sat across from Vivian and Lily, not across from Lily specifically, which Vivian noticed because she was noticing everything. He kept his eyes ahead for most of the ride, on the phone again, giving instructions she couldn't fully parse. But twice, in the gaps between calls, she caught him looking at Lily in that same way, that unnamed thing, and both times he looked away before she could decide what to say about it. Lily fell asleep before they cleared the neighborhood. Children could do that, move from fear into sleep without warning, bodies making the decision before the brain could object. She slumped against Vivian's arm and went out, her breath evening out within a minute, her face slack and open and completely trusting. Vivian watched the city pass and said quietly, so as not to wake her daughter, "Where are we going?" "Safe house in Charlestown," Damien said. "Well, 12-room brownstone. It's been in a shell company's name for 8 years. Nobody connects it to me." "Nobody except whoever connected you to me," Vivian said. He was quiet for a moment. "That file came from inside my organization. Someone who knew exactly where to bury it and how to keep it buried. Someone who's been working with your man in the alley." "Vincent," Damien said, and the name came out flattened, stripped of everything, which told her more than inflection would have. "Vincent Moreau. He was my lieutenant for 9 years. I thought he died in the warehouse fire in 19. He didn't. Clearly." She looked at him. "How does a man survive something like that without you knowing?" "He didn't survive it by accident." Damien's jaw was tight. "He had help. Someone moved him. Someone gave him resources and time and cover." He paused. "The same someone who forged the evidence that made you run. The same someone who buried your file." Vivian felt the pieces arrange themselves with a slowness that was almost physical, like watching ice form. Someone inside your organization wanted both of us out of each other's lives, and also wanted Vincent preserved. Which suggests Vincent didn't fall out of favor with everyone, just with me. "Why?" she said. "Why would anyone in your organization want—" She stopped, looked at Lily, sleeping, back at Damien. Was she already— Did someone already know I was pregnant when I left? The stillness that moved through him was its own answer. "Someone knew," she said. Not a question. "I didn't," he said, and his voice had something raw in the bottom of it that she chose not to examine right now. "I want to be very clear about that. I did not know." "I know you didn't," she said. And she did know. She'd known Damien DeLuca well enough to know that a child was not a piece of information he would have filed away and left alone. Whatever else was true about him, that was true. "Someone knew," he said. "Someone decided that a child complicated the succession plan. Easiest solution was to make us both disappear from each other." She let that sit. The vehicle moved through the streets, the convoy smaller now than it had been outside the diner. 4 vehicles instead of 31, slipping through the city without the same theater. She thought about 4 months of surveillance she hadn't noticed. She thought about the file that had been buried and the photograph that had been delivered and 7 years that had been stolen from all 3 of them. Herself, Damien, and the small warm weight sleeping against her arm. She thought about the man in the alley who had smiled. "He's not just coming for you," she said. "No. He's coming for her." Damien looked at Lily, and that unnamed thing was back in his face, and this time Vivian stayed with it long enough to name it. It wasn't wonder, it wasn't sentiment. It was something older and harder than either of those, a specific kind of reckoning, the kind a person does when they understand that they have something left to lose after a long time of having nothing. "He won't get to her," Damien said. "That's not a plan," Vivian said. "That's a wish." "I have a plan." "Then tell me what it is." He looked at her. "The brownstone. DNA confirmation." "I don't need confirmation," she said, too sharp, and felt Lily stir against her and lowered her voice. "I don't need a test to tell me what I already know, Damien. Don't do that." "It's not for you," he said. "It's for the record. If something happens to me, I need her protected through channels that require documentation." The bluntness of it silenced her for a moment. "Nothing is going to happen to you," she said, and heard how automatic it sounded, how hollow. "You said you don't need wishful thinking." "Fair." The brownstone was on a tree-lined block in Charlestown, set back from the street, unremarkable from the outside. The kind of building that looks lived in and is never quite seen. They took Lily inside and got her settled on a couch in a room that someone had thought to furnish with things a child might find comforting. She didn't know who had done that or when, and the thoughtfulness of it unsettled her in a way she couldn't explain. Damien's people moved through the building with the efficiency she was already beginning to accept as background noise. She got Lily a glass of water and sat with her until she was fully awake and oriented, and then she got her set up with a drawing pad that one of the security team produced from somewhere. And Lily started drawing without asking any more questions, which was either healthy adaptation or a coping mechanism Vivian was going to have to address later. She chose, for now, to believe it was healthy adaptation. In the hallway outside the room, 2 of Damien's senior people were already waiting. She recognized the one who'd been at the gate of the school. The other was a man she hadn't seen before. Older, late 50s, gray at his temples, with the kind of face that had done a lot of weather. Damien introduced him without ceremony. "Marcus Hale. He's been with me longer than anyone." Marcus looked at her with an expression that withheld judgment without being warm. "Ms. Hart." "Tell me about the school attack," she said. "Not the what, the how. Who tipped them?" Marcus and Damien exchanged a look that lasted less than a second, but said something. "What?" Vivian said. "The timing," Marcus said. "The attack happened within 15 minutes of our arrival at the diner. That's not surveillance, that's real-time communication." She processed that. "Someone in your convoy." "Someone with access to our movement schedule," Damien said carefully. "Or someone in your convoy," she repeated, watching his face. "That's what you're not saying." Marcus's expression confirmed it without moving. "Then we have a leak," Vivian said. "We have a problem," Damien said. "The leak is the symptom." "How many people knew you were coming to Boston?" A pause. 6. "And how many of those 6 are in this building right now?" Another pause. Longer. 4, he said. She held his eyes. "Then one of the 4 people in this building told Vincent's people that you were going to the diner this morning, and those people tried to kill me, not you, me." Damien said nothing. "Because Lily was the insurance," she said. "If they killed me, they'd have lost leverage over you, but they wanted me scared. They wanted me to—" She stopped, turned it over. "They wanted me to run again, without your protection this time, out in the open, frightened, which is when they'd take her." The hallway was very quiet. "Tell me I'm wrong," she said. Neither of them told her she was wrong. She pressed her back against the wall and looked at the ceiling and breathed. From behind the closed door, she could hear the soft scratch of Lily's pencil on paper. Normal, methodical. The sound of a child who had no idea how precisely she was the center of everything. I need to know who it is, Vivian said. I need to know before tonight. Vivian, because if you don't know, then everyone in this building is a suspect, including the people between my daughter and the door. And I am not going to sit in a room with my daughter and a list of suspects and pretend that's safe. Damien looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Marcus. Marcus nodded once, the kind of nod that meant something had already been set in motion. There's a second problem, Marcus said. Something in his voice made her push off the wall. The man Vincent used at the diner, Marcus continued, Remy Villeneuve. We pulled his communications. And? He wasn't the only one watching you. Marcus glanced at Damien, and Damien gave him something with his eyes, and Marcus continued. There's a second team, unconnected to Vincent's operation. Different methodology, different equipment. They've been on you for longer than 4 months. The floor felt slightly uncertain under her feet. How much longer, she said. Marcus said, Best estimate is 2 years. She heard the words. She understood them individually. The sentence they made together took a moment to arrive. 2 years. Lily had been 4 years old 2 years ago. 4 years old, drawing pictures of cats and learning to ride her bike on the sidewalk outside their building and mispronouncing spaghetti in a way Vivian still hadn't corrected because she couldn't bring herself to. Someone had been watching her daughter since she was 4 years old. Who? She said. Her voice came out wrong, yet too flat, too controlled, which was what happened when she was past the kind of emotion that made sound. We don't know yet, Marcus said. Then find out, she said. Find out now. She turned away from both of them, pushed the door open, went back into the room where Lily was drawing, and sat on the floor next to the couch and looked at what her daughter was drawing. It was a house. Big, with a yard. 3 figures standing in the yard. 1 tall, 1 medium, 1 small. Lily had given the small one curly hair. The medium one had long hair. The tall one she had drawn last, and she was still working on it, adding details, pressing the pencil down more carefully than she had for the other 2. Vivian looked at the tall figure for a moment, looked at her daughter's face, looked back at the figure. The tall one had dark hair. Lily had given it dark hair, which she'd have had no reason to do based on anything she knew, and yet Vivian said nothing. She put her hand on Lily's back between the small shoulder blades and felt her breathe. Down the hall, she could hear Damien's voice, one phone again, talking to someone, not quiet this time, with an edge she hadn't heard from him yet. Something had changed in the last few minutes. Something Marcus must have found or confirmed, because the quality of his voice had shifted into a register she associated with men who have run out of patience for anything except the specific action they intend to take. She strained to hear. She caught fragments, a name she didn't recognize, a location, something about the harbor, the south side, an old industrial building. Then his voice dropped below what the walls could carry. She put her cheek against the top of Lily's head and stared at the door and thought about the man in the alley and his smile and the 2 years and the 4 months and the file that someone had buried and the photograph that someone had delivered and the 7 years of her life that had been constructed on a foundation someone had deliberately built out of lies. She thought about who had access to Damien's operation at a high enough level to bury a file and to know about a pregnancy and to pull Vincent out of a burning building and keep him alive for 5 years. Who had that kind of reach? Who had that kind of patience? She was still thinking about it when the door opened and Damien stood in the frame, and his face told her something had happened before his mouth did. "We know who it is," he said. She stood up. "Tell me." He looked at Lily, back at her. "Not in here." She touched Lily's shoulder. "I'll be right back, baby." Lily kept drawing. "Okay, Mama." In the hallway, Damien closed the door behind her. Marcus was gone. The 2 security team members at the end of the corridor had moved further away, giving distance, which meant whatever was about to be said was meant for her alone. Damien looked at her with the expression of a man who has just opened something that can't be unopened. "It's not someone in my organization," he said. "Or not only someone in my organization." He paused, not for effect, she understood, but because the next part required the particular precision you give to things that will change everything. "The second surveillance team, the one that's been on you for 2 years. We trace the equipment procurement chain. It leads to a holding company in Delaware that distributes to 3 principals. She waited. One of those principals, he said, is my half-brother. She heard the words. Nolan, he said, like the name tasted like something wrong. Nolan DeLuca, who has been sitting at my right hand for 4 years and who was in the room when I found your file and who is in this building right now. The hall felt like it had gotten smaller. He's the one who buried the file, Vivian said, and delivered the photograph, and pulled Vincent out of the fire, and has been feeding Vincent information about my movements for, we don't know how long, years, possibly from the beginning. She put her hand against the wall, not because she needed the support, but because she needed something solid. Where is he now? She said. That, Damien said, and his voice had gone to a place she'd never heard it go, a place past anger, past calculation, into something ancient and absolute, is the problem. He held out his phone. She looked at the screen. A message, 3 words, from a number she didn't recognize. Bring her out. And beneath it, a photograph. The photograph was of this building, taken from across the street. Timestamp, 11 minutes ago. And in the lower right corner of the photograph, barely visible, caught by the angle of the camera without whoever was holding it seeming to realize it, a hand, a left hand, held close to the body at a specific angle. Thin, wrong. The same hand she'd seen in the alley. Vincent Moreau knew where they were. And Nolan DeLuca, Damien's half-brother, his right hand, the man currently somewhere inside this building, had told him. Vivian looked at Damien. Damien looked at the door at the end of the hall behind which their daughter was drawing a house with a yard and 3 figures, one tall with dark hair, because children know things they have no reason to know. You said there was no way out, Vivian said. No going back to what it was. Yes, he said. Then we go forward, she said. But we do it together, all 3 of us. She held his eyes. Or I take her and I disappear again, and this time you will never find me. The silence between them held everything 7 years had accumulated. Then Damien said, Together. And somewhere inside the building, a door closed on its own, and neither of them looked away from. The door that had closed was at the end of the north corridor, 30 feet away. And Damien was already moving before the sound had finished. Vivian caught his arm. Not hard. She knew better than to physically stop him when he was moving like that. But enough. He turned, and his face had gone to a place she'd only seen it go once before, a long time ago, in a different context, and it had frightened her then, and it frightened her now. Lily first, she said. Whatever you do about Nolan, Lily first. Something moved through him, a recalibration. He nodded once, sharp, and turned back toward the room where their daughter was drawing. He went to the door at the end of the corridor instead, moving fast, 2 of his men materializing from the stairwell to flank him without being summoned, which told her the earpiece communication had already been running while they stood in the hallway talking. The door opened. Empty room. Window facing the back alley, and the window was unlocked, which it should not have been, and the fire escape beyond it held the specific stillness of something recently disturbed. Nolan DeLuca was gone. Damien stood in the empty room for exactly 3 seconds. Vivian counted them from the doorway. 3 seconds where he looked at the window and the fire escape and the ghost of the man who had sat at his right hand for 4 years. And then he turned around and his face was completely controlled, which was the most dangerous version of his face. Lock this building down, he said to the man on his left. Nobody in or out without my direct confirmation. Check every room. Yes, sir. And I need Marcus up here. He's already on his way. Damien looked at Vivian. She looked back. Neither of them said the obvious thing, which was that Nolan had been inside this building when they arrived, which meant Nolan had known where the safe house was, which meant the safe house was no longer safe, which meant everything Damien had set up in the last 4 hours was built on a foundation that his half-brother had been standing on. Marcus appeared at the top of the stairs at a speed that suggested he'd been moving before he was called. He was on his phone, listening, and his expression was doing controlled damage management. The text message, Damien said when Marcus reached them. Trace it. Already running. Burner, obviously, but the tower ping puts it within 6 blocks of this building, which means he sent it before he left. Damien looked at the window again. He was in the building when he sent it. He wanted me to know he was watching. That's theater, Vivian said. Both men looked at her. That's theater, she said again. Sending a message that says, bring her out, and then disappearing. He's not issuing demands. He's managing your attention. He wants you focused on him so you're not looking at something else. Marcus's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and something went wrong in his face. A fast, controlled wrong, the kind she was learning to read. What? Damien said. The convoy, Marcus said. The vehicles we left on Clement Street when we took the two-car exit. Someone hit them. Hit them how? Disabled, all four. Professional job, done clean, no witnesses. Marcus paused. It happened 12 minutes ago, same time as the text message. Vivian understood it before Damien did, or maybe he understood it simultaneously. She couldn't tell. They arrived at the same place at the same moment, and it wasn't a good place. He already has a team in position, she said. The text wasn't a demand. It was a countdown. Damien was already on his phone. The next 20 minutes happened in a compressed, ugly rush. Damien moved through the building, giving instructions she could only partially track, his security team reorganizing itself around the new information with the adaptability of people who've trained for plans failing. Vivian went back to Lily, sat with her, kept her voice level and her hands still while her daughter showed her the completed drawing, the house, the yard, the three figures. The tall, dark-haired one was finished now. Lily had given it a face. It looked nothing like Damien and somehow looked exactly like him. Who is that? Vivian asked, because she needed to hear Lily say it. Lily considered the drawing with the gravity of an artist evaluating her own work. I don't know yet, she said, but he's important. Vivian looked at her daughter's face for a long moment. Yeah, she said. He is. Marcus came to the door 15 minutes later. His expression told her they were moving before he said a word. They left the brownstone through the basement into a service tunnel that connected to a parking structure 2 buildings over, where 3 vehicles were already running. Lily was quiet through all of it. Not frightened quiet, but observant quiet, taking everything in with those dark eyes, filing it away. She held Vivian's hand and didn't drag her feet, and when they got into the vehicle, she looked at the tinted window and said, Are we going somewhere safer? Yes, Vivian said. Okay, said Lily, and leaned against her, and that was that. Damien rode with them again. He was off the phone for the first time in hours, which should have been a relief and wasn't. He sat across from them in the back of the vehicle and looked at his hands for a moment, and then looked up at Lily. And Lily, without being prompted, without any particular reason Vivian could identify, looked back at him. You look tired, Lily said. The corner of his mouth moved. I am tired. My mama looks tired too, Lily said. She always looks tired, but today she looks more tired. Lily, Vivian said. It's just true, Lily said, with the serene certainty of a child who has not yet learned that truth requires diplomatic packaging. Damien looked at Vivian. Vivian looked out the window, but she felt something in her chest that had no clean name. Not warmth, not exactly. More like the memory of warmth, the place where warmth used to live before 7 years of being alone and careful had smoothed it over. They went to a second location, a property in East Cambridge that Marcus vouched for with his own name, which Vivian understood was significant in a world where names were the only currency that couldn't be forged. A smaller building, more modest, easier to secure. 4 rooms and a kitchen and a back garden that was mostly concrete and dead weeds, which made it easier to see anyone approaching from the rear. They got Lily settled in the back bedroom with food and the drawing pad and a directive to stay away from the windows, which she followed with a seriousness that broke Vivian's heart a little. Then the 3 adults, Vivian, Damien, Marcus, sat in the kitchen, and the door was closed, and the 2 security team members outside the kitchen door were close enough to hear raised voices but not normal conversation, and what followed was very much normal conversation, in that it was specific and brutal and nobody performed anything for anyone. Tell me about Nolan, Vivian said. Damien wrapped his hands around a coffee mug he hadn't drunk from. What do you want to know? Everything. He was quiet for a moment. Then, different mother. My father's arrangement before my parents married, which my father disclosed approximately never. Nolan came to me 4 years ago with documentation, paternity records, financial records, the whole file. I had it verified independently. It was clean. He wanted access to your organization. He wanted a family. Damien said it flatly, without sentiment but also without dismissal. That's what I believed. He worked for it. He wasn't handed anything. He earned his position over 3 years before I moved him into the senior role. Or he appeared to earn it, Vivian said. Appears and is are the same thing in my world until they're not. Marcus set down his phone. We've been going back through communications since we identified him, flagging anomalies. Things that looked like noise before that don't look like noise anymore. How long? Damien said. Best estimate. Marcus looked at the table. He's been running communications with Vincent's network since he arrived. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. From the beginning, Damien said. From the beginning, Marcus confirmed. Vivian watched Damien absorb that, watched the muscles in his jaw work, watched him do the math that she'd already done, which was that every operation, every decision, every move Damien had made in 4 years had been visible to Vincent Moreau in something approaching real time. Every strength, every vulnerability, every trusted person, and every exploitable one. 4 years of intelligence handed across by a man sitting at the table. He didn't come to you looking for family, Vivian said. He came as an asset. Vincent sent him in. Yes. Which means Vincent knew about you and me before Nolan arrived. He had the information already. The file you found. Nolan didn't bury it. Damien looked at her. Nolan knew where the file was because he knew where everything was, she said, but he didn't create it. The cover-up happened before he arrived. Someone else buried that file. Someone who was in your organization 7 years ago. Marcus pulled up something on his phone, slid it across the table to Damien. Damien looked at the screen. Something changed in his face. Not dramatically, not in a way that would be visible from a distance, but she was close enough to see it. A very specific arriving, the way a person looks when a thing they'd been refusing to believe finally makes it through the refusal. Victor Raines, he said. Your CFO at the time, Marcus said. He died in 2019. Same warehouse fire as Vincent, different wing. We recovered his remains, confirmed ID through dental. Dental records, Damien said, that someone provided. Yes. The table was very quiet. Victor and Vincent, Vivian said. They built it together. The photograph, the fake file, all of it. Then they staged their deaths in the same fire. And Nolan was the long play, Damien said. They needed time to rebuild. Nolan comes in, earns trust, feeds information while they reconstruct. By the time they're ready to move, he stopped. You'd handed them everything, Vivian said. He said nothing. She understood in that moment the specific nature of what this was doing to him. Not the danger, not the operational failure, but the personal mathematics of it. 9 years with Vincent, 4 years with Nolan, 13 years of proximity, of trust that had been the bedrock of how he'd built and maintained his position, and all of it constructed on the understanding that the people closest to him were the most dangerous ones. She also understood that she didn't have time to feel sympathetic about it, because the operational question was still open. What does Vincent actually want? She said. The message said, bring her out, singular. He wants Lily, Damien said. Why? Because I can rebuild from almost anything, Damien said, with the matter-of-factness of a man describing a known quantity. He knows that. He's watched me do it. The only thing he can use to guarantee my surrender is something I can't rebuild from. He looked at the door behind which their daughter was drawing pictures. She's 6 years old and she's the only person on this planet I've never met who I would... He stopped. Who you would do anything for, Vivian said. Yes. Then we can't let him set the terms, she said, because if he sets the terms will always involve her. And the only way to stop him setting terms is to take away his ability to plan. Marcus was watching her with an expression that had moved, she noticed, from neutral to something more attentive. She recognized the shift. It was the shift of someone recalibrating their assessment of who they were dealing with. We need to find where he is, she said. Not wait for him to make another move. Go to him. I know where he is, Damien said. Both Vivian and Marcus looked at him. The harbor, he said. South Side. There's a decommissioned steel manufacturing plant, the old Meridian complex. I've known for 6 hours. I've been building toward it. 6 hours, Vivian said. You've known for 6 hours where Vincent Moreau is, and you've been, what, gathering resources? Yes. While he's been watching this building and disabling your vehicles and... She stopped. Made herself stop. What are you waiting for? Numbers, he said. I have 31 men in Boston and 16 more coming in from New York. Vincent has approximately 40 mercenaries at the complex. I don't go in until I have the numbers. When does the New York team arrive? 6 hours, Marcus said. We don't have 6 hours, Vivian said. We don't know that... We know that Nolan is loose, and he knows this address because he helped pick it out, probably. And we know that Vincent's team just demonstrated they can move against you in daylight on a public street. We don't have 6 hours. Damien looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at the table. She's not wrong, Marcus said. I'm aware of what she is and isn't, Damien said, and there was an edge in it, not directed at her but at the situation, at the wall the situation had backed him into. He stood up from the table, went to the window over the sink, looked out at the concrete garden, and stood there with his shoulders tight and his hands flat on the counter. Vivian watched his back. She'd watched that back 1,000 times in a different life. It hadn't changed much. Broader, maybe, heavier, with something that wasn't weight. You go in at half strength, she said, or you wait 6 hours and go in having possibly lost the element of surprise and possibly lost this location. There's no good option. There's a less bad option, he said without turning. Then take it. He turned. What I'm about to do, if it goes wrong, it won't go wrong, she said, and held up a hand to stop his objection. I know that's not a plan. I know that's a wish. But sometimes you need the wish first, and then you make the plan. So, what do you need? He looked at her for a moment, then at Marcus. Get the team ready, he said. We move in 2 hours. Marcus was already on his phone before he finished the sentence. The next 2 hours were a controlled storm. Damien's people moved through the East Cambridge building with a focus that transformed the modest space into something else entirely. Weapons staged, communications synchronized, roles assigned and confirmed again. Vivian stayed with Lily for most of it, which was both where she needed to be and where she felt most out of control, because sitting still while other people prepared for violence was its own kind of discipline, and she'd never been good at that kind. She checked in with Damien twice in those 2 hours, brief exchanges in the hallway. He was focused in a way that narrowed everything else down, and she recognized that focus. It was the same thing she'd found in him attractive once, that absolute quality of presence, and now it frightened her in a different way than it used to. At the 90-minute mark, Marcus came to find her. His face was professionally neutral, which meant it wasn't. What? She said. He handed her his phone, a communication intercept, text format, between 2 numbers his team had flagged. She read it twice. When did this come in? She said. 20 minutes ago. Why are you telling me instead of Damien? Because one of the numbers belongs to Elena Voss, Marcus said, Damien's chief of communications, who has been with him for 6 years, who is currently in this building. He paused. And because the message references a secondary target for tonight's operation, she read the relevant line again. Confirm secondary, not the child, the mother. She set the phone down on the hallway table. So Lily wasn't the only piece on the board. Vivian had let herself believe because it was easier, that she was the context, that her daughter was the asset, that her own role in this was incidental to the machinery. She was the mother of the target, the woman who complicated things, the loose variable. But confirmed secondary, not the child, the mother. Which meant Vivian herself was something Vincent needed removed, not taken, not leverage, removed. Which meant Vincent understood something about her that she didn't fully understand yet, or something about what she meant to Damien that even Damien hadn't fully processed yet. She picked the phone back up, read the intercept again, looked at Marcus. He's going to use Elena to feed false positioning information, she said. During the assault, Damien's team goes in thinking they have accurate intel on Vincent's location inside the building, but the intel is wrong, and the team walks into a kill box, Marcus said quietly. Yes. Does Damien know about Elena? Not yet. Why not yet? Marcus looked at her steadily. Because Elena has also been coordinating the secondary team's response, the one targeting you. And the intercept suggests she's been doing it from inside this building, which means she's communicated Vincent's people the address of this building within the last hour. The sound from the back room, Lily's pencil on paper, the soft rhythmic scratch of it, was the most real thing in the building. So they're already coming here, Vivian said. We believe the assault on the plant and the assault on this location are designed to happen simultaneously, Marcus said. Damien goes in. His communications are fed false positions. His team is decimated. And here. They come for me, she said. And Lily is alone. Yes, she breathed. In, out. The hallway was very clean and very ordinary and smelled faintly of the coffee from the kitchen, and outside the back window the concrete garden was gray and still, and somewhere in this building a woman named Elena Voss was the reason all of it was going to come apart. We have to tell him, Vivian said. If we tell him now, Elena will know we've identified her. She'll warn them. The timing of both assaults will accelerate. If we don't tell him, he walks into a kill box. Yes. She looked at the wall, at the pattern of the wallpaper, which was old and slightly water-stained and had nothing to do with anything. Then we tell him, she said, and we deal with Elena before she can communicate, and then we change the plan. The plan as it stands requires, I know what the plan requires. She met his eyes. Change it. Marcus looked at her. That recalibration again, more complete this time. There's something else, he said. In the intercept. She waited. Vincent's ultimatum was designed as a binary, Marcus said. Surrender the Empire or lose the woman you love. That's the language Nolan used to us. That's the framing. He paused. But the intercept suggests the real objective isn't the Empire. Then what is it? Marcus was quiet for a moment in the particular way of someone choosing their words not for impact but for precision. Lily, he said. Vincent doesn't want Damien's organization. He wants Lily, a DeLuca heir, under his control to legitimize the network he's built. The surrender of the Empire was theater. It was always about the child. The floor felt wrong again. He was never going to let me go, Vivian said. It wasn't a question. No, Marcus said. The secondary was never optional for him. You're the one thing that could complicate his access to her for the next 12 years. She thought about the smile. The man in the alley, thin, the wrong hand, watching the vehicle pull away. The smile of someone who had already seen the board 3 moves ahead and found it satisfactory. She thought about the drawing. 3 figures in a yard. The tall one with dark hair. She thought about what Marcus had just told her and what it meant and what she was going to have to become in the next few hours in order to stand between that smile and her daughter. She thought about the self-defense classes at the YMCA and the deadbolt she'd installed herself and the sightlines on Clement Street, all the small practical things she'd built her safety out of, and how none of them were going to be enough for what was coming, and how she had known that on some level from the moment she'd seen the convoy outside the diner, and how knowing it and accepting it were still 2 different countries. She straightened up, pushed back against the wall until her shoulders were square and her feet were planted. Take me to Damien, she said. Marcus nodded and turned toward the kitchen. The door opened before he reached it. Elena Voss stood in the kitchen doorway, and she had her phone in one hand, and her expression was the kind of professional blankness that Vivian now understood was not composure, but performance. And in the half-second before Elena's eyes found Vivian's, the phone in her hand was moving, thumb moving, sending. Vivian crossed the hallway in 3 steps and hit Elena's arm before the thought had finished forming, knocked the phone out of her hand, and it clattered against the baseboard. And Elena's expression broke open into something real and ugly. Not fear, not quite, more like the expression of someone whose math has just failed them, who had run a calculation 100 times and was only now seeing the error. And her arm came up to deflect, trained instinct, and Vivian was not trained, not really, not beyond the basics she'd drilled in a church basement on Thursday evenings for 2 years. But basics were enough when the person across from you wasn't expecting them from you. She drove her elbow into Elena's forearm. Elena's grip failed. The phone hit the baseboard and skidded. Then Marcus was there, and two of the security team were through the kitchen door, and Elena stopped moving because she understood the arithmetic of that. Damien came out of the kitchen behind them. He looked at Elena. He looked at Vivian. He looked at the phone on the floor. "How long?" he said to Elena. Elena said nothing. "How long?" he said again, and the quiet of it was the worst possible version of the question. Elena looked at him with the expression of someone who has decided that whatever was going to happen next was going to happen and that performance was finished. "Long enough," she said. Damien looked at Marcus. Marcus gave him the compressed version in 40 seconds. The intercept, the dual assault timeline, the kill box, the real objective. Damien listened without interrupting, which was how she knew he was at the outer edge of something, because in her experience, Damien DeLuca interrupted when he was comfortable and went still when he wasn't. When Marcus finished, Damien looked at Elena for a long moment. "Put her in the back room," he said. "Not with Lily, the utility room. 2 people on her." "Damien," Elena started. "Don't," he said. Just that. Just the word, without temperature, and Elena closed her mouth, and that was that. They moved her. Vivian picked up the phone from the baseboard. The screen was cracked but lit, and the message was still open in the send queue. It hadn't gone through. The send had been interrupted mid-transmission, which meant the outgoing data was partial. Corrupted or incomplete, Marcus confirmed when she handed it to him. "Can they read a partial?" she said. "Depends on their system. Probably not the content, maybe the timestamp." "So they know something happened, but not what?" "Yes." "Then we have a window," she said. "Small." "Yes," Marcus said. Damien was already on the phone. The next 40 minutes were the most precisely organized chaos Vivian had ever witnessed. The East Cambridge building emptied and refilled in a way that felt like breathing. People out, different people in, the kind of rapid resource redistribution that required a network she was only now understanding the full size of. She stayed close to Lily, helped her into a different vehicle, kept her voice even and her hands warm, answered the questions Lily asked, and didn't offer information beyond the answers. Lily accepted this with the same pragmatic quiet she'd maintained all day. And Vivian stored away a complicated thing she was going to feel about that later when there was time for feeling things. There was not currently time for feeling things. The new staging location was a warehouse in Everett, north of the river, the kind of industrial space that smelled of old metal and machine oil, and was cold even in August. Damien's expanded team, the New York contingent, had arrived early, 6 hours compressed into 2 by whatever pressure he'd applied, moved through it with the specific controlled energy of people who understood what the next few hours contained and had made their peace with it. Vivian put Lily in a small office at the back of the warehouse, the most interior space, no exterior walls, one door. She got her settled with the drawing pad and the remnants of the food they'd brought from East Cambridge, and she sat with her for 10 minutes and let Lily talk about what she planned to draw next. A harbor, she'd decided, boats on the water. And Vivian listened to every word and held each one because she didn't know when the next ordinary moment was going to be. "You're going somewhere," Lily said. Not a question. "Not far," Vivian said. "With the man? Damien?" "With a lot of people." Lily looked at her drawing pad, considering. "Will you come back?" The word she reached for was yes, automatic. The word every parent reaches for. The word that is sometimes a promise and sometimes a wish dressed up as certainty. She caught herself before she said it. "Yes," she said, and made it a promise, and hoped she had the authority to make it. Lily nodded. "Okay." She picked up her pencil. "Tell him he looks tired too," she said. "In case you see him before I do." Vivian stood up. Her throat did something she managed to control. "I will." She found Damien in the main warehouse floor, standing over a spread of architectural plans on a folding table, with Marcus on one side and a man she'd learned was called Ortiz on the other. The Meridian Steel Complex. She recognized the harborfront outline from what Damien had described. An old manufacturing facility decommissioned in the early 2000s, a maze of processing floors and storage structures and elevated catwalks, all of it interconnected, all of it full of angles and shadows, and places a person could be kept or cornered or killed. I'm going with you, she said. All three men looked at her. No, Damien said. He said it automatically, the way you say a thing that seems obvious, and she understood immediately that this was the wrong register. Not a negotiation, she said. You're not trained for… Vincent wants me dead. If I'm here and the assault team is there and something goes wrong with the timing… She held his eyes. I'm not a soft target sitting in a warehouse waiting. I've never been that. Don't make me be that now. Vivian. His voice had something in it that wasn't authority, something that was actually concern, which was harder to push back against. If something happens to you in there, then I need you to make sure it doesn't, she said. That's what I need you to do. Keep me alive long enough to be useful. He looked at her. She looked back. Marcus found something on the building plans to be absorbed by. She's right about the soft target, Marcus said to the plans. If the timing slips and this location is compromised while the team is at the complex… I know, Damien said. Then we're agreed, Vivian said. A pause. Then, you stay with me. You don't move independently. If I tell you to get down, you're already down. Agreed. And you take this. He reached to the table and picked up something and held it out to her. A compact handgun, already checked, safety on. Do you know how to… I went to the range every month for 3 years, she said. After I left. Something crossed his face that she didn't have time to interpret. She took the gun. They left at 11:40 p.m. The convoy to the Meridian complex was 8 vehicles, no lights, moving through the industrial waterfront with the specific invisibility of things that belong to the dark. Vivian rode in the lead vehicle, between Damien and Marcus, watching the harbor come up on their right through the tinted window, the water black and oil smooth under the overcast sky, the lights of the shipyard across the channel doubling themselves in the surface. She'd loved this harbor once, loved it in the practical way of someone who'd chosen it as home, who'd built a life around the smell of it, the sound of it in the morning. It felt different from this angle, from this speed with the gun in her jacket. The complex appeared ahead of them as a collection of dark shapes against a darker sky. Vast, low, the kind of structure that speaks the language of a different industrial era. The main processing building was 8 stories of poured concrete and rusted steel, flanked by 2 smaller structures that Marcus had identified as the coiling facility to the north and the maintenance depot to the south. Between them, connecting everything, a network of elevated transfer bridges and external catwalks that the architectural plans rendered in neat blue lines, but that in reality looked like the skeleton of something enormous. Damien's team split at the perimeter, 2 groups taking the north and south flanks, one moving to secure the dock access at the rear. The primary team, Damien, Marcus, Vivian, and 8 others, entered through the east access gate, which a specialist had disabled remotely from the staging location 20 minutes ago. Inside, the scale of the building was different than the plans had suggested. The plans showed dimensions. The building itself was a specific kind of overwhelming, ceilings lost in the darkness above, the floor a geography of machinery that had been cannibalized or had rusted into permanent stillness, corridors formed by the angles of defunct equipment. The smell was rust and stagnant water and something chemical, and underneath it, barely detectable, the metallic edge of recent human habitation. They were not alone in this building. Damien signaled and the team spread, and Vivian moved with him, 2 feet off his left shoulder, the gun in her right hand with the safety off the way he'd confirmed before they entered. She could hear her own breathing and worked to slow it, could feel her heartbeat in her wrists. The earpiece she'd been given carried the compressed bursts of the flanking teams checking in, and she parsed them with a focus she didn't know she had. The first contact came 60 seconds in. 2 of Vincent's men, positioned at the base of the main processing floor's internal staircase, professionals, alert, but facing the wrong direction because the intel they'd been given, the real intel, not the false version Elena had been designed to feed, put the entry point at the west access. They turned at the last moment, and neither of them had time to do more than turn before Damien's team neutralized them with a precision that was fast and final, and she made herself watch it, because looking away was a luxury she'd just forfeited. They moved up. The second level of the processing floor was a gantry walkway running the length of the building, maybe 60 feet up, connected by the staircases at either end and 2 internal ladders she could see. From up here, the building was a different architecture. She could see the whole floor below, the dead machinery, the shadows moving at the far end where the North team was engaging. She could hear it now. Gunfire, controlled bursts, echoing in the concrete shell of the building and multiplying into something bigger than the source. Damien was moving along the gantry when his earpiece delivered something that stopped him. She was close enough to see his face when he heard it. "Say again," he said, very quietly. She heard the voice in her own earpiece, thin with distance and interference. "South team contact, maintenance depot. They have a hostage. They have..." Static. "Who?" Damien said. "Say the name." Another burst of static. Then, fragmented. "Nolan. They're using Nolan as..." The shot came from above. From the internal structure overhead, from the elevated transfer bridge that ran across the top of the processing building, and it hit the gantry railing 6 inches from Damien's hand, and the ricochet was close enough that she felt the displaced air against her cheek, and she was already moving. Not thinking, moving, the YMCA, training, and 3 years of range time and pure animal instinct collapsing into the same single action, pulling Damien back from the railing by his jacket, dropping behind the gantry's equipment housing as the second shot came and struck where he'd been standing. "Sniper. Up high." Her voice surprised her. Steady. 11 o'clock, the transfer bridge." Damien had his own gun up before she finished the sentence. Marcus was already communicating with the team. 2 of the others were repositioning. She pressed her back against the equipment housing and made herself think through the geometry, the angle of the first shot, the angle of the second, the position they suggested. "He's moving," she said. "The angle changed. He's coming west along the bridge." "How do you..." "The angle changed," she said again. "Second shot was steeper. He moved toward us." Marcus relayed it. A response came back, "Team on the bridge approach. 30 seconds. 30 seconds was not the same as 30 seconds in ordinary time. She knew this now. Damien was looking at her with an expression she'd last seen in a different context entirely. A long time ago, in a room that was nothing like this room. A look that was evaluation and recognition, and something underneath both of those that she wasn't going to name right now. "The South team," she said. "Nolan." "I know. If they're using him as a hostage..." "Nolan made his choices," Damien said, and his voice had a quality she recognized as the closing of a door. Not cruelty, not coldness, but finality. "Whatever they're doing with him, it's a diversion." "Then what's the real problem?" He looked past her, toward the far end of the gantry, where the north staircase connected to the level above. She followed his eyes. A door up there. Heavy, industrial, with a specific kind of framing around it that she'd seen on the plans. The supervisor's observation room, positioned to overlook the entire main floor, built for managing the production line below. Enclosed, elevated. One entrance, and from beneath the door, visible even from here, a thin bar of light. Vincent was in the observation room. He was up there right now, in that light, while the building moved around him like a disrupted mechanism, waiting. Not hiding, not running, waiting. "He wants you to come to him," she said. "Yes." "Because he has something up there you'll come for." Damien didn't answer, which was its own answer. She thought about the intercept, the real objective. Lily's name in black and white on a cracked phone screen. "He doesn't have Lily," she said. "Lily is in Everett. He has the next best thing," Damien said quietly. "He has the position. He has the room. He has the high ground." He paused. "He has everything arranged exactly the way he wants it, and he's waiting for me to walk into it. And the reason he's still waiting instead of trying to run is because he doesn't believe I won't." "Then don't," she said. "I don't have a choice." "There's always Vivian." He turned to look at her fully, and she stopped talking because his face was doing something she needed to pay attention to. "He will keep coming. He built 5 years of patience. He turned my brother against me and my CFO and my communications director, and he watched me from the inside for 4 years, and he has spent all of that, all of it, to get to this room, in this building, tonight. If I don't end it here, it does not end. Not in a month, not in a year. It doesn't end until one of us is finished." She looked at him, at the scar. at the particular way his face looked when he was telling the truth without any architecture around it. "Then I go with you," she said. "No." "Yes." She held the gun steady in her right hand. "Because the intercept said secondary. Because he will not leave this building without trying to close the secondary. And because—" She stopped, found the words that were true, the ones without any architecture around them. "Because I am done waiting in rooms while the world happens without me. I have been waiting for 7 years, Damien. That's finished." The gantry shuddered as something structural responded to the engagement on the floor below. Somewhere in the building, a window failed and air moved. The sniper team was reporting in. Contact neutralized, bridge clear. And Marcus was coordinating the South team response, and the building was engaged on 3 levels now, gunfire and movement, and the compressed voices in the earpieces building into something like controlled catastrophe. Damien looked at her for exactly the amount of time he could afford to look at her. "Stay behind me until I tell you otherwise," he said. "Yes." "And when I tell you to stay, I'll decide that when you tell me," she said. He made a sound that wasn't quite anything. Not a laugh, not a surrender. He turned and moved toward the north staircase, and she followed 2 feet behind him, and Marcus fell in to cover their rear, and they went up. The level above the gantry was a narrow service passage, barely wide enough for 2 people, running the spine of the building. Pipes overhead, catwalks below visible through the steel grating of the floor. The light from beneath the observation room door was stronger here, and she could see the door clearly now. 20 feet ahead, heavy steel, no window. She could hear nothing from beyond it. Damien stopped. He checked his magazine. She checked hers. Marcus peeled off to cover the passage behind them and cover the staircase access. 2-man job, no options, the narrowness of the passage reducing everything to single file. So it was just the 2 of them at the door. He looked at her one more time. She nodded. He put his shoulder to the door. The observation room was larger than she expected. A glassed-in rectangle, maybe 30 feet by 15, the entire floor-side wall original factory glass that would have let supervisors look down on the production line, most of it long since cracked and patched with plywood and wire mesh. The overhead lights were construction work lights, run on a portable generator that hummed in the corner and gave the room a yellowish, unforgiving quality. There was a chair in the center. Metal, utilitarian, not occupied. There were 4 of Vincent's men. She registered them in the first second. Positions. 2 at the rear, 2 flanking the central space. And there was Vincent Moreau, standing at the far end of the room near the old factory glass, looking out at the production floor below, his back to them, his left hand held against his body at that specific wrong angle she'd first seen from a moving vehicle outside a diner 11 hours ago. He didn't turn when the door opened. "I expected you 8 minutes ago," he said, conversationally, as if they were late to something pleasant. "The north access was faster. I told Remy you'd take the north access." Damien stood in the doorway with his gun up, covering the 2 flanking men. Vivian stepped to his left, covering the rear, because the angles demanded it, because the geometry of the room left no other choice, because she'd looked at the situation and understood it faster than she expected to understand things. "Turn around," Damien said. Vincent turned around. He was in his late 60s, which she hadn't expected. She'd constructed him as something younger in her mind, the way threat tends to be constructed. He was thin in the way of a person who has survived something that burned off everything unnecessary, and his face had the particular quality of someone who has long since moved past the emotions other people spend their energy on. His left hand held against his body. She could see it clearly now. 3 fingers, not 5. The remaining 2 and the palm scarred by something old. The warehouse fire. The fire he'd survived. "Damien," he said, and there was something almost warm in the way he said it, which was the most disturbing thing about him. "You look like your father." "My father is dead," Damien said. "Yes," Vincent said. "I know. I was there." A pause. "Not at the end, but for the decisions that led there. Your father made choices about succession that he communicated to me directly. Did you know that? He told me what he planned. Before you were 30. He had doubts." "Don't," Damien said. "I'm not trying to wound you," Vincent said, and sounded genuine, which was somehow worse. "I'm contextualizing. Everything I've done, the years, the patience, the architecture of it, it was never personal, Damien. It was corrective. You tried to have my daughter killed, Damien said. I tried to retrieve your daughter, Vincent said, and the distinction in his voice was precise. The child is a DeLuca heir. She belongs in the structure, properly placed. What she doesn't need is a mother who will spend the next 15 years teaching her to run from what she is. Vivian felt her grip tighten on the gun. The secondary order, she said. Her voice came out even. She was somewhat surprised. Vincent looked at her for the first time. He looked at her the way he'd looked at her from the alley, with full attention, with the specific interest of someone who has studied a subject extensively and is now comparing the subject to the file. Ms. Hart, he said, you're more capable than Nolan described. The secondary order, she said again. You wanted me eliminated, not taken. Why? Because you would never accept the structure, he said without hesitation, like it was obvious. You spent 7 years building a life outside it. You came back into it today, and within 6 hours, you'd identified Elena, disabled a communication, and placed yourself at the center of the assault team. You're not a variable that stabilizes over time. He tilted his head slightly. You're not going to take that as an insult. No, she said. Good. He looked back at Damien. Here's what I want. It hasn't changed. The organization passes to me in operational terms. You retain nominal position. Your name, your public face, whatever you need to maintain the legal infrastructure. The girl comes to me for education, real education, what she's owed. He paused. In exchange, this ends tonight. No more escalation, no more losses on either side. And Vivian, Damien said. Vincent looked at her again. Ms. Hart retires, he said carefully. Comfortably. I'm not without... No, Damien said. Vincent's expression shifted by the smallest measurable amount. Damien? No, he said again. To all of it. Every part. The 4 men in the room had not moved, but they were more present now. A shift in readiness, a compression of potential, the specific quality of people who are about to be instructed to do something. Vincent looked at Damien with what appeared to be genuine sadness, the sadness of someone who had hoped for a different answer and is not surprised by the answer they got. I didn't want to use this, he said. He reached into his jacket. She tracked the movement, and her finger moved to the trigger, and she held, because his hand came out with a phone, not a weapon, and he turned the phone to face them. The screen showed a live feed. Small room, stone or concrete walls. Industrial, somewhere enclosed. A figure seated, zip-tied to a chair. Nolan DeLuca looked directly at the camera with the expression of a man who has made a very long sequence of very bad decisions and arrived at their logical conclusion. Behind Nolan, barely in frame, a man stood with something in his hand. The South team, Vincent said, is currently occupied in the maintenance depot. Your people haven't broken through yet. They will, eventually. The question is how long eventually takes. He held the phone steady. Nolan made choices I won't defend, but he's still your blood. He still shares your father's name. Vincent paused. Surrender the operational structure, tonight, in writing, and I release him to you. Damien looked at the phone, at Nolan's face on the screen. She watched him look at it, watched him look at his half-brother who had spent 4 years dismantling him from the inside, who had been planted as an asset, who had run for the moment his position was burned and been caught by the people who'd planted him. Because that was the cruelest part of Nolan's position, she understood. He'd been used, then discarded, then used again as leverage by the same man who'd sent him in. She watched Damien make the calculation. Not quickly, not the way a person makes a decision when the answer is easy, but the slow, terrible way a person does it when every option has a cost they can see clearly. Damien, she said quietly. He looked at her. She held his eyes. She shook her head. Once. Barely. He looked back at Vincent. He lowered his gun by 3 inches. Not down, not a surrender, a statement, the specific angle of a weapon that is choosing what it's pointed at, and said, in a voice that had nothing left in it that wasn't true, release him anyway, or don't. But this, He looked around the observation room, at the four men, at the cracked factory glass, at the construction lights, at all of it. Ends tonight either way. And the only decision left is whether you want to make it harder than it has to. The silence that followed those words was the specific silence of a room in which everyone has just understood that a line has been crossed, and there is no administrative process for uncrossing it. Vincent looked at Damien for a long moment. The phone with Nolan's face on it was still in his hand, still lit, still showing the live feed from wherever the maintenance depot had become a holding room. The construction lights hummed. The generator in the corner ticked with the rhythm of something mechanical that didn't know or care what was happening around it. Then Vincent said, "All right," and the four men in the room moved. She'd been watching them with the peripheral attention she'd been cultivating all night, the part of awareness that doesn't fix on one thing but holds the whole picture loosely. And even so, the speed of it compressed everything into sensation before it became thought. The two at the rear came forward. The two flanking split in opposite directions to create angles. Professional, coordinated. The specific movement of people who have practiced this in rooms exactly like this one. Damien dropped the nearest flanking man before he'd covered half the distance. One shot, clean, and the man's momentum carried him 2 more steps and then stopped abruptly in the way of bodies when the thing that was animating them is no longer there. The second flanking man reached Damien, and Vivian heard more than felt the impact. The collision of 2 bodies at speed, a grunt, the specific sound of a struggle where neither person is giving ground. She turned toward the rear men because the geometry demanded it, because Damien was occupied and the room had 4 corners and someone had to cover the ones he couldn't, and she raised the gun and her hands were not shaking, which she noted with a distant clinical surprise. "Down," she said to both of them. Neither of them went down. They were professionals. Professionals don't go down because someone tells them to. The one on the left moved toward her with a speed she didn't fully process until he was inside the distance where the gun was useful, and she did what the instructor at the range had told her you do when someone closes the distance. She used the gun differently, as weight and momentum, brought it across in an arc that connected with the side of his face while she stepped inside his reach, and the impact traveled up her arm in a way that felt like ringing, and he staggered, and she had enough space to put the gun back where it needed to be. The second rear man had stopped. He was looking at the gun and at her face and doing his own calculation. "I said down," she said. He went down. Slowly, deliberately, the way experienced men go down when they've decided the math doesn't work. Behind her, she heard Damien's struggle end, a specific series of sounds she'd rather not be able to identify as well as she now could. And then he was upright again, breathing hard, his jacket torn at the shoulder. And he looked at the man on the floor in front of her and the one she'd managed, and then he looked at her. "The instructor said don't hesitate," she said, before he could say anything. Her voice was steadier than her hands, which had begun to shake now that the moment was over, the particular betrayal of adrenaline when it decides it's done with you. He looked at her for 1 second, then he turned to find Vincent. Vincent had not run. This was the thing she'd expected him to do. Take the window of the fight to move toward the door, toward the external catwalk, toward whatever extraction he'd built into his plan. He'd had the time. He'd chosen not to use it. He was standing at the factory glass, looking down at the production floor below, the floor where the engagement was still ongoing. She could hear it, the controlled bursts of gunfire, the voices in the earpiece reporting contact and positions in the compressed language of people doing brutal work. From up here, it would look like a map. She understood suddenly that was why he was looking at it. Not because he was resigned, because he was still reading the board. "Your South team broke through," Vincent said, without turning. "Nolan is being moved. Your people have him." A pause. "The man I had behind him. He would have followed my order if I'd given it. I didn't give it." "Why?" Damien said. "Because I'm not a butcher." He turned then, finally, and looked at them both. "I've never been a butcher. Everything I've done has been structural, organizational. I don't enjoy the other parts." "Victor Rains enjoyed the other parts," Damien said. "He delivered the photograph. He delivered it personally." "Victor had less discipline than I gave him credit for," Vincent said. "He said it without apology, without deflection, the way a man describes a tool that failed. I told him to arrange for the file. He escalated. He destroyed 7 years, Vivian said. Vincent looked at her. Yes, that was beyond the scope of what I intended. A separated woman and a buried file was sufficient. The photograph was Victor's elaboration. She looked at him. She looked at him for a long time, at the thin face and the damaged hand and the specific quality of his attention, and she tried to find in it something she could attach her anger to, a villain's pleasure, a predator's enjoyment. And she couldn't find it, which was the most disturbing thing she'd encountered in a long day of disturbing things. He was a man who had stolen 7 years of 3 people's lives as a structural decision, and he didn't feel like a monster, and that was somehow worse than a monster. You need to stop, she said. Not to Damien, to Vincent. Whatever happens in the next 5 minutes, whatever Damien does, whatever you had planned, it stops here. You understand that? Vincent looked at her steadily. Yes, he said, and she believed him, and she wasn't sure what to do with believing him. Damien raised his gun. Vincent looked at it the way he'd looked at the production floor, as information. I want to ask you something first, Damien said, and I want an honest answer. I've been honest throughout, Vincent said. That's always been the frustrating part for you. My father, Damien said, the doubts he communicated to you, about the succession, about me. He held the gun level. His breathing was controlled and she could see the effort of controlling it. Was any of it real? The generator hummed. Outside, below, the engagement sounds had diminished to something more sporadic. The South team threw, Nolan secured, the floor engagement wrapping its brutal arithmetic. Vincent was quiet for a moment that was not the quiet of evasion, but the quiet of precision. Your father, he said, had doubts about every decision he ever made. That was his nature. He doubted the organization. He doubted the people in it. He doubted me for 20 years and trusted me anyway, because the doubts never outweighed the evidence. He paused. He doubted his own blood because he loved you, and love makes people stupid about what they're looking at. He thought his doubts about you were perception. They were fear. Another pause, the last one. He was proud of you. He told me that also. That was not something I shared with you when I had the opportunity. I'm telling you now. Something moved through Damien's face that she looked away from, because it was not a thing she had the right to watch. She heard him breathe. She looked at the cracked factory glass and the darkness of the harbor beyond it, the lights of the channel doubling themselves in the water, and she thought about Lily in the Everett warehouse drawing boats on the water, and she waited. She heard the shot. One shot. Then nothing. She turned back. Vincent Moreau was on the floor, not the chair. He'd never been near the chair. He'd died on his feet, which was probably the way he'd always imagined it. It was fast. She would say that about it later, on one of the 3 a.m. nights, when the day she'd lived inside this story came back to her with the precision of things that have burned themselves into permanent memory. It was fast. Damien lowered the gun. He stood with it at his side and looked at the man on the floor for a moment, not with satisfaction, not with grief, with the particular emptiness of someone who has done an irrevocable thing and is waiting to discover how it will settle. Marcus's voice in her earpiece. All clear, South team. Building secure. Assets contained. South staircase. Ready when you are. She touched Damien's arm. He turned. She didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say that the moment hadn't already said. She just held his arm until she felt something in it change. A release of something held too long, too tight, the way a fist opens when it finally decides to. They went down together. The building took 40 minutes to clear and document, which meant 40 minutes of standing in the industrial cold of the Meridian complex, while Damien's team moved through it with the deliberate thoroughness of people who had learned what incompleteness cost. She sat on a piece of equipment on the main floor and let herself be still for the first time in 14 hours. And the stillness had a specific physical quality, the way the body reasserts itself when it's been given back to you. The ache in her arm where she'd used the gun as a weight, the tremor in her hands that was old adrenaline looking for somewhere to go. Marcus brought her water. She drank it. He didn't say anything, which she appreciated. Nolan DeLuca was brought to the main floor at the 50-minute mark. Two of the South team flanking him, the zip ties removed because he wasn't running, and everyone in the building understood he wasn't running. His face was unmarked, which surprised her. He looked at her when he came in, and then at the floor, and then at the space where Damien was standing 30 feet away. Damien looked at him for a long time. "I'm not going to ask you why," Damien said. Nolan looked up. "I'm not going to ask you because I know why. Vincent needed access, and you needed something to belong to, and he found that and used it, and that's a thing I could spend a long time being angry about, and it wouldn't change what it is." He held Nolan's eyes. "What I'm going to ask you is simpler. Were you in it when you came to me? The day you showed me the documentation, were you already his?" Nolan was quiet for a moment. Then, "Yes." "From the beginning?" "Yes." Damien nodded once, like a man confirming a diagnosis he'd already suspected. "Then we're finished," he said. "You'll have resources to relocate and a window to do it in. After that, you're outside what I can extend to you." "Damien." "That's what I have," Damien said. "Take it." Nolan looked at him for a moment more, at the floor, at some invisible point between the two that was probably where he was processing the totality of the choices he'd made and where they'd deposited him. Then he nodded, and that was that. She understood, watching it, what kind of discipline it required. Not to forgive exactly, which she didn't think was what Damien was doing, but to close things cleanly when they were done. Not to tear at them when the tearing would only cost more. She understood it because she'd had to learn a version of it herself. Not tonight. 7 years ago, and slowly, and badly, and imperfectly. She called the Everett warehouse at 2:15 in the morning. One of the security team answered, and she said she needed to speak to the person in the office, and there was a pause, and then a small voice said, "Mama?" She pressed her fingers against her forehead. The relief moved through her in a wave she wasn't able to manage or organize, just felt. "Hi, baby," she said. Her voice made it 2 words before it did something she couldn't control. "Are you okay?" Lily asked, with the direct practicality of someone very young who has been worried for a long time and is done being indirect about it. "Yes," she said. "I'm okay. I'm coming to get you." "Good," said Lily. "I finished the drawing. I did the boats. I'm going to show you." "I can't wait," Vivian said. She hung up and sat with the phone in her hand and the concrete floor of the Meridian Steel complex under her feet, and the harbor visible through the blown-out window sections, the water still and black, the first indeterminate lightning at the far edge of the sky that wasn't dawn yet, but was the atmosphere doing the preliminary work of dawn. Damien found her there 10 minutes later. He sat down on the equipment beside her. Not close, not deliberately distant, just beside her, the way 2 people sit when they've been through something together, and the something is still too recent to have a shape yet. He looked out at the water. She looked at the water. The generator in the observation room above had run out of fuel at some point in the last hour, and the building was quiet in the particular way of large industrial spaces at night, a quiet that had its own texture. "Tell me what you're thinking," he said. "I'm thinking about 7 years," she said. "What about them? Whether they're a loss or a gap." She turned the thought over. A loss is gone. A gap is just missing time. You can't fill a loss. You can fill a gap. He was quiet for a moment. "What would filling it look like?" "I don't know yet," she said. "I know what it doesn't look like. It doesn't look like armed convoys and observation rooms and people getting killed." She looked at him sideways. "That part needs to be over." He held her eyes. "I know." "I'm not asking you to stop being who you are," she said. "I'm asking you to stop doing what you've been doing. There's a difference." "Yes," he said. "The businesses. The legitimate ones. There are more of them than people know," he said. "There have been for a long time. It's not—" He stopped. "It's not as simple as flipping a switch." "Nothing is as simple as flipping a switch," she said. "That doesn't mean you don't flip it." He looked at the water. She waited, because she'd gotten better at waiting in the last 14 hours, which was a grotesque way to develop patience, but you worked with what you had. "I want her to know me," he said. She understood he was talking about Lily. The shift in his voice was specific. Not softer exactly, but less constructed, the register of something he hadn't yet organized into language. She already does, Vivian said. She doesn't know what you are. She knows what you look like and what you sound like and that you're tired. She'll figure out the rest. What if she figures out the rest and decides? She's 6, Vivian said. She's not making decisions about you yet. You have time. She paused. Don't waste it. He didn't say anything for a while. The sky did its preliminary work. Below them and to the left, the harbor traffic was beginning its earliest motion. A tug moving south, its running lights amber and white, its wake spreading in the dark water with a slowness that looked like something being carefully undone. The photograph, she said. Victor's photograph. Yes. Who was she? The woman in it. Victor's wife, Damien said without hesitation, like he'd had the answer ready. At a function, 3 months before he staged his death, someone cropped and reframed it. It took the context team 40 minutes to find the original last week. She absorbed that. 40 minutes, 7 years. The disproportion was not something she could do anything useful with, so she set it down. Were you? She stopped, started differently. In those 7 years, was there? No, he said. You don't know what I was going to ask. Yes, I do, he said. And no. She looked at the water. There was someone, she said. For me. For 2 years. He was decent and ordinary, and he knew nothing about any of this, and I ended it because I couldn't let him be in proximity to something I didn't fully understand yet. She paused. I want to be honest with you about that. I know, he said. You don't. Marcus is thorough, he said. When we found the file, I asked for a full picture. She blinked. So you knew before you walked into the diner? Yes. And? And nothing, he said. You were alone for 7 years with a child I didn't know about, and someone gave you 2 years of ordinary. I don't have the standing to feel anything about that. She looked at his profile, at the jaw she'd given to her daughter, at the scar she'd touched once in a different life and that she could touch now if she chose to, which was an awareness she filed away for later, for one of the ordinary mornings this was going to have to eventually become. We're going to have to do this very slowly, she said. I know. She's going to ask questions I don't know how to answer yet. We'll figure it out. That's not a plan. No, he said. It's a commitment. Plans are conditional. Commitments aren't. She looked at him for a moment. He looked back, and there it was. The thing she'd spent 7 years trying to build distance from. The thing that had survived the photograph and the file and the isolation and the years and was still here in the pre-dawn cold of a decommissioned steel plant, unchanged, which was infuriating and inconvenient. And also, she was tired of lying to herself about it, exactly what it was. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. They sat with the water for a while longer. Marcus came to them at 3:40 a.m. with the kind of efficiency that she suspected was his default state regardless of hour or circumstance, and reported the building fully cleared, team accounted for, 2 losses on their side that he reported by name, which she noticed he reported their names, not their numbers, and 8 of Vincent's people in custody, and the remainder dealt with in the terminology that meant what it meant. The harbormaster's office had been notified of a reported disturbance in the industrial zone, which would be logged and filed and bureaucratically managed in the morning. The Meridian complex had been in a legal and financial holding pattern for 11 years, which left certain questions about what had occurred inside it with certain amounts of jurisdictional ambiguity. She didn't ask him to explain that further. They drove to Everett in the early dark, with a much smaller convoy than had blocked the street outside Harlow's diner 14 hours ago. 3 vehicles. She sat beside Damien in the back of the middle one, and neither of them felt the need to fill the silence, which was its own kind of information. Lily was awake when they arrived. This did not surprise Vivian. Lily had never been good at sleeping through things she was curious about, which was a quality Vivian had alternately found charming and exhausting, and now found only charming, completely, without reservation, because she'd had 14 hours of sharp clarity about exactly how temporary everything could be and how stupid it was to be ambivalent about the charming things. The security team member in the back office opened the door, and Lily looked up from her drawing pad and saw Vivian and was across the room before the door had finished opening, and the impact of her small body was solid and real and smelled of drawing pencils and the particular scent of a child who had been awake too long. And Vivian held her for a long time without saying anything, just held her and breathed. "You're okay," Lily said into her shoulder. "Yes," Vivian said. "I knew you would be." A pause. "I told the man with the earpiece. He was worried. I told him." Vivian made a sound that was neither laugh nor cry, and was a little of both. "That was good of you." "I know." Lily pulled back and looked at her mother's face with the clinical thoroughness of a child conducting an inspection. She looked at the arm Vivian had used as a weapon and was not going to mention. She looked at the state of Vivian's hair, which had not recovered from the night. She looked at the expression on Vivian's face, whatever it was, and appeared to reach some internal conclusion. Then she looked past Vivian to the door. Damien was standing in the doorway. Lily looked at him with the same inspection quality she'd applied to her mother. Thorough, unhurried, the gaze of someone who is taking accurate readings and not performing any particular reaction. "You're not as tired," she said. "A little less," he said. "Did you help my mama?" A pause. "She helped me," he said. Lily considered this. It seemed to satisfy something. She went back to the drawing pad on the floor and picked it up and brought it to Vivian, and then, with the casual naturalness of a child who makes decisions from instinct and hasn't yet learned to be strategic about them, she brought it to Damien also, so he could see. The harbor drawing, the boats. 3 boats she'd done, different sizes, moving in the same direction, and on the shore, small but deliberate, 3 figures. She'd added them late, Vivian could tell. The pencil lines were fresher, less integrated. A tall figure, a medium figure, a small one with curly hair. "I did the boats for you," Lily said to Damien. She said it without looking up, which was how she gave gifts, sideways without making eye contact, without requiring acknowledgement, which was a quality she'd developed entirely on her own because Vivian had never taught her it, and it was somehow already there. "Because I don't know what you like yet. But most people like boats." Damien looked at the drawing for a moment. He crouched down to Lily's level, which she noticed, and looked at it from her angle. "Most people do," he said. "These are good boats." "I know," said Lily. "I'll make you a better one when I know you more." "I'd like that," he said. Lily looked at him then, direct. The first time she'd looked at him directly all night. And Vivian watched her daughter look at this man who was her father and didn't know it yet, not in any way that had been put into words, and she watched Lily make some private internal assessment with those dark eyes that were exactly his. "Okay," said Lily. "Can we go home now?" Vivian looked at Damien. He looked at her. "Soon," she said. "We're going somewhere safe first." "Is it comfortable?" "Yes." "Do they have good food?" "We'll make sure of it," Damien said. Lily picked up her drawing pad and tucked it under her arm with the authority of someone who has decided the meeting is adjourned. "Okay," she said. "Let's go." The drive out of Everett was quiet. The sky was doing something more serious about becoming morning, the darkness thinning at its own edges, the first gray quality arriving that was the true beginning of day before the color came. The city outside the windows was in the specific condition of a place that hasn't started yet. Streets empty and damp, storefronts dark, the harbor visible in gaps between buildings, still and patient. Lily fell asleep between them before they cleared the bridge, her head listing slowly to the side until it came to rest against Vivian's arm, the drawing pad still clutched under her elbow. Vivian put her hand on her daughter's hair, felt the warm weight of her breathing, and looked out the window at the city turning slowly in the early light. Damien put his hand over Vivian's on top of Lily's head. Not a claim, not a gesture, just a hand placed where it was, present, warm, the specific weight of someone who intends to stay. She didn't move it away. The weeks that followed were not simple, which she'd known they wouldn't be. She'd known the morning after of something like this would have its own architecture, legal structures that Marcus navigated on their behalf, conversations with people she was never fully introduced to, the deliberate and careful dismantling of certain things that needed dismantling. She'd watched Damien do it with the same methodical patience he brought to everything, without theater, without announcement, with the particular resolve of someone who has decided on a direction and is not interested in revisiting the decision. He moved legitimate operations forward, construction interests, logistics infrastructure, a chain of warehouses along the Atlantic seaboard that had been held in shell companies and were now being moved into clear ownership under a management company that Marcus ran with 3 other people Vivian came to know and provisionally trust over time. It was not a simple switch. It was a long, deliberate, unflashy process, and it was happening, which was what mattered. Nolan left Boston. She heard he'd gone south. She heard months later, through a chain of secondhand information she didn't probe, that he was working in logistics in a city that had nothing to do with anything he'd been before. She didn't feel anything particular about that, which told her something about the limits of her own capacity for extended anger. She'd used up what she had on the night itself, and there wasn't more coming. Lily asked about Damien directly on a Thursday morning in September, 6 weeks after the night at Meridian. She'd been sitting at the kitchen table with her cereal, and she looked up at Vivian with the specific expression she got when she'd been thinking about something for a while, and had decided to stop thinking around it. "Is he my dad?" she said. Vivian sat down across from her. She'd rehearsed this, or tried to, had constructed versions of the conversation, sequenced the information, thought about age-appropriate framing. She'd done all of that, and it turned out not to matter because Lily had asked the question directly, and the only answer to a direct question from her daughter was a direct answer. "Yes," she said. Lily looked at her cereal, back up at Vivian. "How come you didn't tell me?" "Because I was scared," Vivian said. "And because I made a mistake a long time ago, and I believed something that wasn't true, and by the time I understood that I'd made it for a long time, and I didn't know how to undo it." "You should have asked me," Lily said. "You weren't there yet," Vivian said. "You were still getting here." Lily appeared to find this logically acceptable. She ate some cereal. "Is he going to come see me?" "As much as you want him to." "I want him to come for dinner," Lily said. "I want to show him the new drawing. I did a better boat." "I'll tell him," Vivian said. "Tonight," said Lily. "I'll ask him about tonight." "Tell him," said Lily, with the absolute authority of someone who is 6 years old and has decided. He came that evening. He brought food he'd asked Vivian about because he didn't know what Lily liked yet, and he wasn't willing to guess, which told Vivian something she'd already mostly known about what kind of parent he was going to be once he let himself do it. He sat at the table, and Lily showed him the boat drawing. It was better. She hadn't been wrong. The lines more confident, the water more accurately rendered for someone who looked at it every morning on the way to school, and he looked at it seriously and asked her 2 questions about it that were genuine and not performed. And Lily answered them with the particular delight of a child whose work has been taken seriously. After dinner, while Vivian cleaned up in the kitchen and Damien sat on the floor with Lily going through the entire drawing pad page by page, Lily narrating each one with the solemnity of an archivist walking someone through primary documents, she stood at the kitchen sink and looked out the small window above it at the street below, at the evening light doing what evening light does to old buildings and wet pavement, and she let herself be still inside it. She thought about the morning she'd heard the convoy, the coffee burning, the floor vibrating before she understood what was coming. She thought about the photograph, the one that had been constructed from an ordinary moment and handed to her as a verdict, and that she'd believed because she was 24 and frightened and alone, and sometimes people believe the worst things because they're already afraid the worst things are true. She thought about what 7 years was, what it had built and what it had taken, and whether those were the same thing or different. She thought it was both. She thought loss and survival were not opposites. She thought a gap could be filled without pretending it hadn't been a gap. She thought you could come back from things without calling what you came back to a happy ending, which was a construction she'd always found too neat for what actual life was, too resolved, too finished. What she came back to was this: a kitchen, a window, a street in the evening, the sound of her daughter in the next room explaining a drawing of 3 boats to a man who was learning, one evening at a time, who he was allowed to be. That was not an ending. That was a beginning that had been a long time finding its start. She dried her hands on the dish towel and went back to the room where her family was. 2 months later, on a Saturday morning when the harbor was the particular pale gold of October and the air off the water had the first real edge of cold in it, the three of them walked along the waterfront. Lily between them, holding one hand each, which was something she'd started doing without being asked, and that neither of them had any intention of discouraging. No security detail. That had been a process, the incremental reduction of visible apparatus. And they weren't fully finished with the process, but they were here, this morning, on this particular stretch of harbor walk with the fishing boats coming in, and a vendor selling coffee from a cart, and the seagulls doing what seagulls did, and there were no armed vehicles, and no earpieces, and nobody watching the roof lines. Lily stopped to look at a boat being brought into the dock. She narrated its approach with the authority of a person who has studied boats extensively in drawing form and considers herself qualified to comment on the real ones. Damien looked at Vivian over the top of their daughter's head. She looked back. She thought about the first morning she'd dropped Lily at Clement Street and walked to Harlow's diner and stood at the coffee station watching the street, and told herself that this was enough, that quiet was enough, that she'd built a life out of absence and it was sufficient. She thought about believing that. She thought about how long she'd believed it, and how well she'd maintained the belief and how thoroughly this particular morning disproved it. Lily turned and grabbed both their hands and pulled, which was her standard signal that she was ready to move and expected everyone else to be also. They moved. The harbor stretched ahead of them in the pale gold October light, patient and ordinary and entirely without drama, the way the best mornings are. The boats moved on the water, the air was cold and clean, the city made its city sounds around them, indifferent and alive. Vivian Hart walked with her hand in her daughter's and her shoulder 2 inches from the man who had spent 7 years as an absence and was learning, carefully and imperfectly and with genuine effort, how to be a presence. It wasn't finished, it was just finally, after a very long time, started.